I'm going to be breaking down some of WildCard BellyDance's improvisational tribal style or ITS slow movement vocabulary moves. While our format is firmly rooted in ATS, you'll notice some subtle and not so subtle differences in these foundational moves. Taqsim is the first move I'll break down. It looks like this. It's a figure 8 that's lying on its side, and it's a hip-based movement. Imagine a figure 8 lying on its side, thinking about your hips going down, out, and up. Down, out, and up. Before we get into the move, let's focus on our posture. Feet are going to be flat, right underneath you. Your knees are soft, pelvis is in neutral, chest is lifted, and imagine there's a pole running straight through your body. Head is lifted. Arm positions. Here's arm position 1, which is your thumb and first finger are separated right by your hips. Arm position 2, I call this being on the shelf. You'll notice your elbows are pointing towards the back wall. 2.5, hands are off the shelf. So as I bend forward, you'll notice that subtle curve that's in my arms. Yeah? Let's bring down our arms, and we'll start with some simple drills that will help warm up our hips. Slide your hips to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left, making a straight line back and forth. Slide your hips to the right, and now notice that more of your weight is on your right foot. Slide your hips to the left, same thing, more of the weight's on your left foot. Noticing that subtle weight change that's happening. Back to neutral. Now we're going to do single hips on the down. So we want our right hip to go down. So what do? Our feet are going to be flat. We're going to slightly straighten our left leg while bending our right, but keeping both knees soft. Doing that, your right hip goes down, left hip goes up. Left hip goes down. What do? Slightly straighten that right leg. Left leg bent. Right hip down, left hip down. Right hip down, left hip down. Notice that both of my feet are flat on the floor, keeping your knees soft the entire time. There's a mistake a lot of people make is locking out their knees. It's going to look like this from the side. It's going to throw off your posture, your alignment. This is not what you want. So remember, keep those knees soft the entire time. Right hip goes down, slightly straighten that left leg, but notice both knees are soft. Yeah? So let's put all of those movements together. We're going to start with the right hip. So feet flat, pelvis neutral, chest lifted. Imagine that pole running straight through your body. Arms in position 1. We want the right hip to go down. So what do? Slightly straighten that left leg. Now we're going to push out the right hip slightly. At this point, we want our left hip to go down. So what do? Slightly straighten the right leg, left hip automatically goes down, right hip comes up. Now we're going to push that left hip out to the side. And now we want our right hip to go down, so we slightly straighten the left leg. So right hip goes down, push it out, left hip down, push it out, right hip down, push it out, left hip down, push it out, right hip down, push it out, left hip down, push it out. Remember, it's all happening in the knees. My obliques are also kicking in, helping to bring that hip up, but most of the movement is happening by bending and straightening my knees. So, right hip goes down, slightly straighten that left leg, push it out to the side, and now left hip goes down, push it out to the side. Right hip goes down and out, left hip, down and out, right hip, down and out. Left hip, down and out. So there's a couple rules you want to keep in mind. Keep your feet flat on the floor. There's this tendency for people to want to raise up their heels to try and make their hips move. Keep them flat on the floor, keep your knees soft. The next thing you want to think about is that you want both of your hips to be even. A lot of us will notice you'll have this great ease of having a huge Taqsim on one hip and a baby Taqsim on the other. You want to start out small with both of your hips so both sides can gain the fluidity and the bigness at the same time. Yeah? The next thing to think about is you want to be between two panes of glass. So the movement is happening side to side or up or down. There's nothing happening front to back. Yeah? So think about that. Feet flat on the floor, both hips even. You're between these two panes of glass. That pole is running straight through your body. So feet flat, knees soft, pelvis neutral, chest lifted, pole running straight through your body. Arms in position 1, starting with that right hip. Right hip goes down by slightly straightening the left leg. Push it out. left hip goes down, push it out, right hip down and out, left hip down and out, right hip down and out, left hip down and out. So the next thing to think about is this invisible weight change that's going to be happening within my feet. So there's not going to be anything different happening, but you'll just start to subtly notice the weight changes occurring. So with your feet flat, knees soft, pelvis neutral, when your right hip goes down, you're going to notice that probably more of the weight's going to be on your left leg to begin with, but as that hip starts to slide out, that's when more of the weight starts to transition onto my right foot. As my right hip comes up, here's all the weight. There's no weight really on my left foot at this point until I start to push that hip out, and that's where I slowly put more of the weight onto my left foot. So slowly putting all the weight onto your right foot, slowly putting all the weight on your left foot, slowly putting all the weight on your right, slowly putting all the weight on your left. It's like you're walking in place without taking your feet off the floor. Right hip goes down and out, left hip down and out, right hip down and out, left hip down and out. So those three things to think about again. Feet are flat, both hips are going to be even. You're between those two panes of glass. And the last little bit is that fluidity of having that invisible weight change happen with your hips. So once you got that down, let's think about what's happening with the arms. We're not doing this in position 1 unless you're in the chorus. For us, our arms are in position 2.5. So hands are, here's on the shelf, here's off the shelf. Your hands are going to be echoing what's happening with your hips. They're going to imagine that they're pushing through something thick and gooey. So your right hand pushes out, your left hand comes in, left hand pushes out. It's very subtle. And it's going to echo the movements of your hips. Right hand and right hip, left hand and left hip. Right hip goes down and out, left hip down and out, right hip down and out, left hip down and out, right hip down and out. Noticing that invisible weight change is happening in your feet. Right hip, left hip, right hip, left hip. So now we're going to turn. While it looks beautiful straight to the audience, we can also turn it in a circle. So the cue for the turn is that my head is going to look in the direction that I'm going to be moving, and then my body orientation is going to start to change. Yeah? So something that will help out your troupe when you're beginning this move, when you want to turn, and you want to turn all in sync. You want all of your hips in the same position, and you want to be turning at the same time. So a great way to start out is to first take like a baby step with the right foot, pivot on the left. Baby step with the right, pivot on the left. Baby step, pivot, baby step, pivot. Eventually, when your troupe gets more comfortable dancing together, you can kind of get rid of all of those quarters and make it a little bit more fluid. So, right hip, left hip. There's the cue for the turn. Right hip, left hip. Right hip, left hip. Right hip, left hip. Right hip, left hip. I can turn the other way. There's the cue. Right hip, left hip. Right hip, left hip. Right hip, left hip. Right hip, left hip. Remember, keep your feet flat on the floor even when turning. So the next thing we can do with this move is a level change. When I slowly walk my hands up, I'm going to be rising the balls of my feet. So I've got one foot slightly in front of the other, it won't matter which one. I have my legs a little closer together. I've got that pole running straight through my body, and I'm going to come down as far as my knees feel comfortable. Then I'm come back to standing, back to flat feet, all while doing the move. So right hip, left hip. Slowly walking my arms up, rising to the balls of my feet, coming down while doing the move. The move's going to be a little bit smaller while you're doing the level change, and that's fine. Back to flat feet. Let's try it one more time. Walking your hands up. Rising to the balls of your feet. Slowly coming down as far as your knees feel comfortable. So those are the basics for Taqsim. It's a movement that's going to take a while of drilling and practicing it before you feel completely comfortable with it and you've mastered it. This series will follow WildCard BellyDance's Level 1 class. So the first week we start off with Taqsim. Moving on to next week, or the next segment, will be Body Wave. See you soon.